Hey everyone, this is Miss Jacobson. In this video, we're going to talk about how to tell if graphs are proportional. So our learning target is I can determine if two quantities are in a proportional relationship by using a graph. Alright, so a couple of characteristics that proportional graphs must have. The first one is proportional graphs must be linear, and what that word means is that the graph must be a straight line. And the second characteristic of proportional graphs is that the line must pass through the origin. And remember, the origin is that point on a graph that is 0, 0. And so if you look at my drawing of a coordinate plane over here, the point in the very middle, the one that intersects the x and the y-axis, remember this is the x, this is the y-axis, that point where they intersect is 0, 0. So if I were to think about a proportional graph, it might look something like this. It might go through the origin and it might be a straight line. I apologize, I'm not very good at drawing straight lines on this, but I think you hopefully get the idea. It must go through the origin and it must be a straight line. If it fits those two characteristics, then it is proportional. Alright, so our first question says, does the following graph represent a proportional relationship? Explain why or why not. So before we really want to make this decision, first thing we want to do is inspect our graph. So if I look at this graph, it says hiking distance at the top. On the x-axis, it's labeled as the time in hours, and the y-axis is labeled as distance in miles. So what this graph is telling us is as the time increases, the person hiking is able to walk further, which makes sense when you think about it. So let's go back to our list of characteristics that proportional graphs must have. So the first thing that we want to check is it a straight line? And yes, it is. Okay, it looks like a straight line. And then the second thing is, does it pass through the origin? Remember, the origin is that 0, 0 point right there. And yes, it does. So our answer to this, does it represent a proportional relationship? I would say yes, because it is linear, and the line goes through the origin. All right, so the next question says, does the following graph represent a proportional relationship? Explain why or why not. So the first thing that we're going to want to check for is does it go through the origin? Remember, if this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis, my origin would be right here, and the graph starts at the origin, so that part is good. However, then we get to the next part where we have to check and see if it's linear. And if I just kind of follow this graph, notice how it's not making a straight line, it's making a curve. And so therefore, this is not proportional. So I would say my answer is no. And the reason for that is the graph is not linear. Okay, my answer is no. All right, on to the next question. Does the following graph represent a proportional relationship? Explain why or why not. So the first thing we might want to check is, does the graph pass through the origin? So remember that origin is the point where the x and the y intersect. And in this case, it does not. Okay, the line does not go through the origin. And so my answer, therefore, has to be no. Remember that it has to, for it to be proportional, it has to pass through the origin and it has to be linear. In this case, this graph is linear because it does make a straight line, but it does not pass through the origin, so my answer is still no. So no, the graph does not pass through the origin. All right, so just remember, for it to be proportional, it must pass through the origin and it must be linear. All right, have a great day. Let me know if you have any questions.